My name is Kelly, and I am in the Stormwater Engineering Department. I've met several of you before, and if I haven't yet, it's nice to meet you. I will be talking about basins tonight. If you have any stormwater questions that I don't answer, and we will go through questions, I will answer some questions, but you might have very particular questions that pertain to your basin or your subdivision. We do have a table in the back with two of my coworkers, also from the Stormwater Engineering Department, to answer questions. If you don't have time to stay for questions, we also have a sign-up sheet for you to sign up, so we will call and we will contact you. Also, if you're, depending on what type of basin you have, you may also be required to have inspections, and I will be going over that requirement. If that is the case, I highly recommend you go ahead and sign up on that sign-up sheet too, because that way we can meet with you and that way you can understand those expectations in person as well. So I'm going to try to be as non-technical as I possibly can. So if I say something that you don't understand, please do raise your hand. I might ask you to come ask me after this symposium. And if that's the case and you have a similar question, feel free to walk on back and we'll chat. Okay, so really quickly, stormwater in the city of Wentzville enters into, when it rains down through your yard, drains through your yard, drains down the street, and enters into what we call an inlet. Whoop. Inlet, a storm drain. These drain to the creek. These do not drain to the wastewater treatment plant. And many of these actually are not treated and go directly to the creek without any sort of filtration process. So anything that goes down those will end up in a creek. After it enters into the inlet, it flows through pipes underground, and eventually, most places in Wentzville, it will end up in a basin. And some of those basins do filter. That's why I said some do, some don't. And on the far side, you can see what we call the flared end structure. Those come into basins and then also drain into creeks below those basins.
Do you show which creeks?
What'd you say?
Which creeks they go into?
All creeks. All creeks in Wentzville end up with rainwater from Wentzville. So there are lots of creeks in Wentzville, and we actually do have a map online of the creeks. And if there's a creek, I guarantee there's rainwater from a community, from a subdivision, from a commercial area, drained to that creek. So every single creek. Yes. And we're going to talk about the function of basins and why we have basins and why that is important to the creek. Because that is something that all of you deal with. I guarantee your subdivision has at least one basin, maybe more. So this is generally the progression of rainwater. And to be clear, we're going to talk about ownership and what you're responsible for as HOA property owners and what the city is responsible for. Generally, if it is a concrete structure like you see, the city very likely maintains it. So if you have a particular question, you can reach out to us and we're more than happy to answer. But generally, in residential areas, especially in common ground and the inlets and pipes in backyards and along streets, most of those are public infrastructure that we maintain. We do not maintain grade, we do not maintain swales in yards, but we do maintain once the water enters into the structure and heads on down to the basin, that pipe is something we do maintain. But basins generally in between the concrete structures, in between the pipes and the outfall structures, those are up to the HOA's maintenance responsibilities. So there are several different types of maintenance that happen in these common grounds and in these facilities, and it completely depends on what type of stormwater basin that you have. And we'll talk about different types of basins and how you identify what type of basin you have. That way you can come and ask questions about your particular basin. But also, before I move on, to be clear, you see that middle picture? That picture has a concrete swale running down the middle of it. That is something the city does not maintain. Those concrete swales are considered private property maintenance. And if you have one that's eroding really badly or very cracked and holding water, you can certainly reach out to us. But generally the answer is you can remove it and regrade that area. And if you have particular questions about that, like I said, don't talk to me. But generally, most of the types of maintenance that you're going to see are mowing, debris removal, and water quality facility maintenance requirements. That one, don't worry, we're going to talk about that last bit more. But generally, for classic detention basins, most of you are familiar with the mowing. And that one's probably, yeah, we got a contract for that. But if you have a water quality facility, you're going to want to talk to your community about adding that to your contract as well for maintenance. We'll touch on that some more. So basins serve our community. They are an essential part of our stormwater infrastructure. And their main intention are to protect from flood. However, there are two new types of basins out there. So generally the flood protection are the older facilities, and the channel protection and water quality improvements generally are the newer facilities. Those also have flood control, depending on the basin. So flood control, when the basin fills up, you have an opening in the bottom of the structure. It's usually for the older facilities, it's quite a large opening. And that generally means, if it just has that large opening at the bottom, that generally means that it's mostly there for flood protection. If it has a small opening at the bottom of it, that is, and a large opening up top, that is for channel protection and flood protection. If it is a wet pond, a pond in general, a lake, a retention basin, if that is the case, that can also be for flood, and that can also have channel protection. It's a little harder to identify, but generally that flood control space where that water fills up is above where that normal pool, we call it, where that water normally sits when it's not raining a whole bunch. That is called the normal pool. Everything above that is the flood control space and the area that is intended to fill up during heavy rain events and be slowly released. So to help us prevent flooding and stream bank erosion, that's what the channel protection is for, stream bank erosion. To have both of those things, we must slowly release that water. Think about if that basin wasn't there and water's just running down that pipe, it's gonna go right down the stream and on down it goes at a lickety-split. And to prevent those things, these basins capture that water and slowly release it into our streams in a controlled fashion, in an engineered fashion. So that's kind of a simple way to start identifying your basin. But don't worry, I have some pictures. So as I mentioned, we have detention basins, retention ponds and basins, and water quality facilities. Water quality facilities, there are many types. Fire retention, dry swales, stormwater wet ponds, which also look like retention ponds, and riparian buffer widening. So I have pictures of some of these, and depending on your subdivision, your community, you may have one of these, you may have several different of these, depending on what is detailed on your record plat. Sometimes it'll be on there, but honestly, generally, contacting us and getting information about it is one of the best ways. There is also something called a maintenance covenant, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, but and I have some papers for you to take home also. But that is also a way to see what type of facility you have. That document should be passed on to you whenever your subdivision is finished out, whenever it's dedicated. That document should be being passed on to the HOA. So how do we really know what you have? And how we know what requires an inspection? So detention basins. These are usually dry, hopefully, and you're probably mowing them. They look like this classically, although they may not have a concrete swale. Generally, you'll see one taller concrete structure in them, a few flared ends coming in. Retention basins or ponds, we also call them wet ponds. It's redundant, I know, but that's what it's in. That's how it is in many documents in my field. So if you hear me say that or hear someone else say that, know that that's what we mean. So these permanently hold water. Detention basins generally are dry, should remain dry around 72 hours after a rain event. Retention ponds are also considered oftentimes an amenity. And like I mentioned, the volume that we care about as flood control, channel protection, that is above the normal pool. A lot of HOAs end up asking me the question, well, what about the space underneath the normal pool? That is what's considered the amenity. And so that depth is not something that I'm going to come out and go, I'm going to wade out in my boots and go, oh no, this is too shallow. Though shallow basins can cause issues with algae and other nuisances. And so we do have recommendations and resources regarding some of those concerns that you can certainly speak to us about. So it's not that we're going to totally ignore it, but it is not something that depth is not something that we say, you shall fix this because it's not functioning correctly. That space that we care about is above the normal pool.
Can you put fish in?
I get that question all the time. From my perspective, that is not something that I would say yes or no to. It's not really something that I'm going to prevent. So I will say that these are intended for pollution, to help us clean out pollution, especially the newer ones. So keep that in mind, but I know many that are stocked, lots of them. And some of them were ponds previously, right? They were retrofitted into what is now used for flood control. So, they may have already had fish in them. So you can certainly reach out to NDC and ask them questions, Missouri Department of Conservation. And newer retention basins actually do have that water quality aspect, that cleaning, that filtering aspect. And so the newer retention ponds do require inspections. Older ones do not. That is confusing. If you have one of these and you want to know, please call me, and I'll let you know. But generally, if you see a lot of native plants around the basin, that probably means it's a newer one, and probably means that it requires an inspection. All right, other water quality facilities. They often look like the one here on your right, and like I mentioned also, they could be a pond. There's also lots of other different types of water quality facilities. There's certain types that are used on commercial sites that you don't really see in residential areas. So yes, commercial sites and industrial sites are treated too nowadays and are required to be treated. And so these water quality facilities, their intention are to target certain types of pollutants, such as litter, such as sediment, before it gets into the creek. Because the city has something called an MS4 permit. I'm not going to go into explaining that because I could talk for 2 days about that. But it is something the city is required to do. We are required to make sure that the water that is entering into our local creeks is cleaned up to the best that we can possibly do. And that means that these facilities are required, which means that also maintenance of these facilities are required. And that can look like lots of different things. It could look like weeding out unwanted plants, like this. This is a bioretention here. It could look like weeding. It could look like, also, honestly, for retention ponds, it could look like weeding too. It could look like removing trash. It may be preventing erosion from occurring along the slopes. There are many different types of maintenance activities that happen in the forebay, which is this rock area here. Oftentimes you'll see a forebay in ponds and in bioretentions, and it's that rock structure up there. That's purpose is to catch sediment and pollutants and other things before it goes into the rest of the basin. So if you have an older retention pond and a lot of sediment is getting into it and you don't have a forebay, that is very possibly something that my stormwater division or engineering may recommend to you. Because essentially what it does is it keeps all that near the shore and an easier place to maintain. So different types of these water quality facilities that I mentioned. The water quality facilities will have a stormwater facility maintenance covenant and operation and maintenance plan. If you don't know where that document is, you can ask us for it. So please write your name on the sign-up sheet back there at our table. These require annual inspections, and you will be hearing from us if you don't submit your inspections. We have an online portal. You can also submit paper inspections. The portal will be being updated in the next couple of years too, to try to make it even easier, because right now all the inspection types are sectioned out into different types of basins, and we would like it to be much simpler. If you have a detention basin or a detention pond that is not water quality and you're wondering about, what if I want to do an inspection and help track maintenance activities and that kind of thing, we have forms for that too, and we could certainly help recommend maintenance activities for those as well. So you can visit our website for more information. We have lots of different information about native plants, local contractors, different types of facilities, how to submit an inspection. If you have questions, come on back and meet us at the table. I have William's contact information up here. He is the basin guru. He is the person that will be probably inspecting your facility. So we do facility and basin inspections as well, the water quality inspections, I should say specifically, for that permit that I mentioned, the MS4 permit, we're required to do inspections for those facilities. So you'll see us around, and you will probably see William. He is at the table back there, and so if you would like to meet him, get his contact information, it is there. And other than that, I think I'll ask you to save questions and ask me at the table if you don't mind. That way we can get to our last presenter.